Congratulations! You have awakened on the final night of Constantinople. The year is 1453. The date is May 28th, past midnight. Outside, Ottoman cannons rumble in the distance, while you walk through the cold marble corridors of the Byzantine palace. Tonight, you will witness the last breath of a thousand-year civilization. In the gentle glow of firelight, this melancholic tale told in a calm voice will take you to one of history's most touching moments while soothing your soul. Close your eyes and let the crackling of the fire guide you back through the centuries. The sound of distant thunder isn't a storm, it's history itself, reshaping the world one cannonball at a time. But tonight, we're not focusing on the conquest or the politics. We're focusing on the people, the quiet moments, the human hearts beating their last rhythm in the shadow of an empire that had stood for over 1,000 years. Take a deep breath. Feel the cool stone beneath your feet as we walk together through the corridors of the great palace of Constantinople. The year is 1453, and this is the story of the last night of Byzantium. Listen to the gentle crackling of the fire beside you, and let its warmth carry you into this tale of endings and beginnings, of human courage in the face of inevitable change. The palace around you is vast and ancient, its walls having witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, the prayers of saints, the conspiracies of courtiers, and the dreams of emperors who once ruled half the known world. Tonight, these same walls echo with whispered prayers and quiet conversations as the last generation of Byzantines prepares to face a dawn that will transform their world forever. The great palace of Constantinople stretched across terraces overlooking the Sea of Marmara, its marble columns and golden mosaics reflecting 1,000 years of imperial glory. Once, these halls had housed an emperor whose word could command armies from the Danube to the Euphrates. Tonight, they sheltered the remnants of an empire that had shrunk to encompass little more than the city walls themselves. You find yourself walking through the hall of the 19 couches, where Byzantine emperors had once held ceremonies so magnificent that foreign ambassadors returned to their courts speechless with wonder. The marble floor, worn smooth by centuries of imperial processions, reflects the flickering light of oil lamps that burn in bronze sconces along the walls. Each flame seems to dance with memories of past glories, the coronation of Justinian, the triumph of Basil the Bulgar Slayer, the wedding feast of John Cantacazinos. The air carries a complex mixture of scents that tells the story of a dying empire. Frankincense from the palace chapel, where prayers rise continuously to heaven. The salt tang of the nearby Bosphorus, where enemy ships control the waters that once carried tribute from distant provinces, and the faint smell of smoke from cooking fires throughout the city, where families prepare what might be their last meals as Byzantines. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos sits in what was once the magnificent throne room, though tonight it feels more like a scholar's study than the seat of an empire. The great throne of gold and ivory, decorated with precious stones and carved with scenes of imperial triumph, seems almost to mock the present circumstances. Constantine has chosen instead to sit in a simple wooden chair, wearing not his imperial purple, but a dark tunic that makes him look more like a monk than an emperor. At 58 years old, Constantine bears the weight not just of his own mortality, but of the mortality of everything he has sworn to protect. His face, though worn by sleepless nights and the burden of impossible decisions, still carries the dignity that marks him as the heir of Caesar Augustus and Constantine the Great. His hands, resting on the arm of his chair, are those of a man who has held a sword in battle and a pen in scholarship, who has known both the burden of command and the comfort of books. The emperor is not alone in his midnight vigil. Throughout the palace, others keep watch as well, each in their own way preparing for what tomorrow might bring. In the women's quarters, Empress Helena Cantacazinos moves quietly among the children who have sought refuge in the palace, her gentle voice carrying through the corridors as she tells them stories of saints and heroes, the same tales that have comforted Byzantine children for generations uncounted. Helena is not Constantine's wife. He never married, dedicating his life entirely to the empire. But she is his sister-in-law, the widow of his brother Thomas, and she has taken on the role of imperial hostess and mother to all who need comfort in these dark hours. Her own children are far away in Amoria, and she has remained in Constantinople by choice, knowing that someone must tend to the spiritual needs of those who face the end of their world. In the palace kitchens, the servants continue their ancient routines with quiet determination. Master Maximos, the head cook who has served 3 emperors and prepared feasts for countless dignitaries, shapes bread with hands that have fed royalty for 40 years. Tonight, even the simple act of baking bread feels sacred, a defiant assertion that life continues even at the edge of apocalypse. The kitchen itself tells the story of the empire's decline. Once these chambers had been filled with exotic spices from India, silk-wrapped delicacies from China, wines from every corner of the Mediterranean. Now the supplies are simple: grain, oil, a few vegetables from the palace gardens, some preserved fish from the Bosphorus. But Maximos shapes each loaf with the same care he once brought to preparing banquets for visiting emperors, because dignity, he believes, lies not in what you have, but in how you treat what you have. His assistants work quietly around him, grinding grain in stone mills, tending fires, cleaning pots that have served imperial tables for decades. Young Theodoros, barely 16, rolls dough with careful attention to his master's instructions. He has worked in these kitchens for only 2 years, but he has absorbed the rituals and traditions as if they were holy mysteries. Tonight, each task feels like a prayer, each careful measurement like an act of devotion to something larger than themselves. In another wing of the palace, Anna Komnenos the Younger tends to duties that extend far beyond the normal concerns of a palace servant. At 23, she has spent her entire adult life within these walls, and every tapestry, every carved capital, every painted saint's face is as familiar to her as her own reflection. But Anna is more than a servant. She is a keeper of memory, entrusted with preserving the small, precious details that make a palace a home. Tonight, as she moves through the corridors carrying fresh candles to replace those that have burned down, Anna pauses at each familiar sight. Here is the portrait of Emperor John VIII, Constantine's brother, who died trying to unite the Eastern and Western churches. There is the icon of the Virgin Hodegetria, painted, tradition says, by St. Luke himself, which has protected Constantinople through a dozen sieges. In this alcove stands a statue of Constantine the Great, the first emperor to embrace Christianity, whose new Rome became the heart of the Orthodox world. Anna has never learned to read, but she knows the stories behind every image, every object, every room. She learned them from the older servants, who learned them from their predecessors, in an unbroken chain of oral tradition that stretches back centuries. These stories are not written in any book. They exist only in the memories of people like Anna, and tonight she realizes that she may be one of the last to know them. As she replaces a candle in the Imperial Library, Anna encounters a scene that fills her with both hope and sadness. Master John Kanakazinos, the Imperial Librarian, works with several assistants to preserve the most precious manuscripts in the collection. They wrap volumes in oiled cloth, seal them in wooden boxes, prepare them for hiding or for transport to safety beyond the city walls. The library represents the intellectual heart of the Byzantine Empire, containing works that exist nowhere else in the world. Here are the writings of ancient philosophers whose thoughts would have been lost forever without Byzantine preservation. Here are histories that record events long forgotten in the West, scientific treatises that preserve knowledge from the classical world, religious commentaries that represent centuries of theological development, and literary works that capture the soul of Byzantine civilization. Master Kanakazinos moves among these treasures like a priest among holy relics. Each book he handles represents not just information, but the life's work of some scholar or author, the careful labor of scribes who copied and recopied these texts through the centuries. Many of these manuscripts have survived invasions, fires, earthquakes, and political upheavals that destroyed empires and scattered peoples. They are, in their way, more durable than marble or bronze. Anna, the librarian, says quietly as she approaches, these books have been the glory of our empire. In them, we preserved the wisdom of the ancient world when barbarians threatened to destroy it. We kept alive the light of learning through dark ages. Whatever happens to our city, this light must not be extinguished. He shows her a manuscript of Plato's Republic, copied in the 11th century by a monk whose careful handwriting is still clearly legible after 400 years. This book has taught hundreds of people about justice and the proper ordering of society. Even if this particular copy is lost, those ideas live on in the minds of people who learned from it. That is our true immortality, not in stone buildings or golden crowns, but in the thoughts we pass on to others. Anna nods, though she doesn't fully understand the philosophical implications of his words. What she does understand is devotion, the same quality she sees in Master Maximus shaping bread, in Empress Helena comforting children, in Emperor Constantine accepting his terrible burden. Whether preserving books or baking bread or telling stories, everyone in the palace tonight is engaged in acts of love, tending to precious things that give meaning to human existence. Beyond the palace walls, Constantinople pulses with the quiet activities of a city preparing for siege. From the windows of the palace, you can see lights flickering in houses throughout the urban districts, each one representing a family, a story, a collection of human hopes and fears. The great city that once boasted nearly 1 million inhabitants now holds perhaps 50,000 souls, but tonight each of those souls burns with particular brightness. In the district near the Golden Horn, where merchants and artisans have lived for generations, Maria Paleologinus sits with her 3 children around their small fireplace. The room is modest but clean, decorated with religious icons and a few pieces of family silver that represent generations of careful saving. Her husband had been a soldier in the imperial army, killed 2 years earlier fighting in Anatolia against the advancing Ottomans. Since then, Maria has maintained their household by running a small shop that sells religious candles and icons to pilgrims visiting the city's many churches. Tonight, with her children gathered close, Maria faces the challenge that confronts every parent in Constantinople: how to comfort and protect the young when you yourself are frightened and uncertain. Her eldest son, Demetrius, is 16 and burns with the desire to join the city's defenders. Her twin daughters, Sophia and Irene, are 14, old enough to understand the gravity of their situation, but young enough to still look to their mother for reassurance about the future. "Mama," Sophia asks quietly, her voice barely audible above the crackling of their small fire, "what will happen to us tomorrow?" Maria looks at her daughter's face, so young and trusting despite everything, and feels her heart break a little more. How do you explain to children that the world they have always known is ending? How do you offer comfort when you yourself need comforting? How do you maintain hope when hope seems like a luxury you can no longer afford? "Whatever happens, my darlings," Maria says finally, pulling her children closer to her, "we are together, and we are Byzantine. Our people have survived for over 1,000 years because we know how to endure, how to adapt, how to preserve what is most important even when everything else changes." She begins to tell them a story she learned from her own grandmother about their ancestor Michael Paleologos, a Byzantine soldier who had fought alongside Emperor Basil II in the great campaigns against the Bulgarians 2 centuries earlier. It is a story of courage and faith, of a man who stood firm in battle even when surrounded by enemies, who protected his comrades even at the cost of his own safety, who never forgot that he fought not just for an emperor, but for an idea, the idea that civilization, learning, and faith could triumph over barbarism and ignorance. As Maria speaks, her voice grows stronger and more confident. The story reminds her of who she is, where she comes from, what she represents. Her children's faces grow calmer as they listen, drawing comfort not just from her words, but from her renewed sense of purpose. In telling the story of their ancestors' courage, Maria rediscovers her own courage. In reminding her children of their heritage, she reminds herself that some things are stronger than fear. Nearby, in a house where 3 generations live together, old Prokopios the fisherman sits with his grandson Nikephoros, teaching the boy how to mend nets by lamplight. It is a skill that has been passed down through their family for centuries, and tonight it seems especially important to continue the tradition, even if tomorrow might bring an end to their way of life. You see, young Nikephoros, the old man says, his weathered fingers moving expertly through the rope. Fishing is not just about catching fish. It is about understanding the water, the weather, the seasons. It is about patience and persistence and respect for the sea that feeds us. These are good lessons for life, whether you spend it on the water or on land. The boy, who is 10 years old, listens carefully while trying to copy his grandfather's movements. His small fingers struggle with the knots, but he is determined to learn. Outside, they can hear the sounds of soldiers preparing for battle, but inside their small house, time moves at the ancient rhythm of teaching and learning, of wisdom passed from old hands to young ones. In the great church of Hagia Sophia, the most magnificent building in the Christian world, hundreds of people have gathered for what they know might be the last Byzantine liturgy ever celebrated under its vast dome. The church, built by Emperor Justinian 9 centuries earlier, represents the architectural and spiritual heart of the Byzantine Empire. Its dome, suspended seemingly without support above a space large enough to hold thousands of worshippers, has been called a marvel that rivals the heavens themselves. Tonight, Hagia Sophia is packed with people of all classes and conditions. Nobles in silk robes kneel beside commoners in rough wool. Greek-speaking Byzantines pray alongside Italian merchants who have chosen to remain in the city. Orthodox believers and Catholics, who have spent decades arguing about theological fine points, set aside their differences to pray together for deliverance, or at least for courage. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Gregory III Mamas, leads the service with a voice that carries across the vast interior despite his advanced age. The liturgy tonight is the same one that has been celebrated in this church for centuries, with prayers and hymns that date back to the earliest days of Christianity. But tonight, every word carries special weight. Every gesture seems touched with finality. The candlelight flickers off the ancient mosaics that cover the walls and dome. Christ Pantocrator looking down with infinite compassion. The Virgin Mary holding the Christ child. Saints and emperors rendered in gold and jewels that catch and reflect the flame. These images have watched over countless generations of worshippers, witnessing baptisms and weddings, funerals and coronations, the great moments of joy and sorrow that mark human existence. As the Patriarch raises the consecrated bread and wine, the entire congregation falls silent. In this moment, the Ottoman siege might as well not exist. The cannons positioned outside the walls seem infinitely distant. Time itself seems suspended as the mystery of the Eucharist unfolds in the same words, the same gestures that have sanctified this space for nearly 1,000 years. Among the worshippers is Constantine himself, who has come not as emperor but as a simple believer. He kneels in a side chapel, his imperial regalia laid aside, praying with the same fervor as the humblest peasant. Beside him kneel his closest advisors and friends, men who have shared the burden of these final years. There is George Francis, his childhood friend and private secretary, who has recorded the empire's decline with careful precision, but also with deep love for the people and traditions he has served. There is Lucas Notaras, the Grand Duke who commands what remains of the Byzantine fleet, a man who has sometimes opposed the emperor's policies, but who tonight stands united with him in faith and determination. The service continues for hours, following the ancient rhythm of prayer and praise. Hymns rise to the dome and seem to linger there, as if the building itself participates in the worship. The congregation moves through the familiar patterns of standing and kneeling, crossing themselves, kissing icons, lighting candles. Each action connects them not only to God, but to the countless generations of believers who have performed these same acts in this same space. As dawn approaches and the service nears its conclusion, the patriarch offers a final blessing. His words, spoken in the ancient Greek of the liturgy, seem to encompass not just the people present, but the entire history of Christian Byzantium. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May he grant you peace. In the women's quarters of the palace, a group of children has gathered in what was once a schoolroom. These are not just the children of palace servants, but also refugees who have sought sanctuary within the palace walls, orphans whose parents have died in the long wars, children of minor nobility whose estates have been overrun, young ones whose families have sent them to the capital in hope of safety. Their ages range from 5 to 15, and tonight they are all too frightened and excited to sleep. The combination of fear and anticipation that fills the air has affected them as much as the adults, but they lack the experience to understand what they're feeling or what tomorrow might bring. Empress Helena has come to comfort them, bringing with her not only a collection of beloved Byzantine folk tales and legends, but also a presence that radiates calm and maternal warmth. She settles into a chair by the fireplace, while the children arrange themselves on cushions and carpets around her feet. The fire casts dancing shadows on the walls, making the room feel like a safe cocoon separate from the dangerous world outside. Tonight, Helena says in her gentle voice, I want to tell you about the great Emperor Justinian and his Empress Theodora. They lived here in this very palace almost 1,000 years ago, when our empire was young and strong and stretched from Spain to Persia. As she speaks, the children's breathing grows deeper and more regular. Some of the stories are familiar to them, but Helena's telling makes them fresh and magical. She describes the great cathedral that Justinian built, the same Hagia Sophia where people are praying at this very moment. She tells them about Theodora's wisdom and courage, how she convinced her husband to stay and fight when enemies surrounded Constantinople centuries ago, when it seemed that all was lost but faith and determination saved the day. But Mama Helena, whispers little Zoe, who is only 6 years old and has been orphaned by the wars, why are there so many soldiers outside? Are they bad men? Helena pauses, choosing her words carefully. She must be honest without being terrifying, realistic without destroying hope. They are not bad men, little one. They are soldiers doing what soldiers do, fighting for their emperor and their beliefs, just as our soldiers fight for us. But we are also doing what we do. We are being Byzantine. We are being brave and kind and faithful, just as our people have been for 1,000 years. Young Constantine, age 12 and named for the emperor, raises his hand. He is old enough to understand more of what is happening, but still young enough to need reassurance. My father says that no matter what happens, we will always be Byzantine in our hearts. Is that true? Yes, Helena replies firmly, and her certainty seems to fill the room with light. That is very true. Being Byzantine isn't about living in this particular city or serving this particular emperor. It's about carrying certain ideas and beliefs and stories with you wherever you go. It's about remembering that learning is precious, that beauty matters, that every person has dignity, that faith can sustain you through any trial, and you can carry those things forever, no matter where you go or what happens around you. She tells them more stories about Saint Basil the Great, who cared for the poor and built hospitals, about the Scholophotios, who preserved ancient books and founded schools, about ordinary people who did extraordinary things because they remembered who they were and what they believed. As she speaks, several of the younger children fall asleep, comforted by her voice and by the warmth of the fire. But the older children remain awake, and Helena can see in their eyes that They are trying to memorize not just her stories, but this moment itself. The feeling of safety, the sound of her voice, the warmth of the fire, the sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. They are creating memories that will sustain them, whatever tomorrow brings. Not all of the men preparing to defend Constantinople are Byzantine. In the months leading up to the siege, small groups of Western Europeans have arrived to help defend the city. Some came seeking adventure, others driven by religious conviction, and a few because they recognized that the fall of Constantinople would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout Europe and the Mediterranean world. The most famous of these foreign defenders is Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a Genoese soldier of fortune who has brought 700 well-trained men with him. Giustiniani is a professional warrior who has fought in battles across the Mediterranean, from Spain to Cyprus, and he has come to Constantinople not for money. The Byzantine treasury is nearly empty, but because he believes in the cause and respects Constantine as a man of honor. Tonight, Giustiniani is making a final inspection of the defenses along the land wall, the massive fortification that has protected Constantinople for over 1,000 years. Even though the wall has been severely damaged by the enormous Ottoman cannons, it remains formidable, and Giustiniani is determined to make the attackers pay dearly for every inch of ground. The land wall is a marvel of defensive architecture, consisting of not one but 3 separate barriers: an outer wall, a middle wall, and an inner wall, each higher than the one before it. Between the walls are wide spaces where defenders can maneuver, and the entire system is punctuated by massive towers that provide platforms for artillery and archers. For over 1,000 years, this wall has turned back every army that tried to take Constantinople by land assault. But tonight, even Giustiniani's experienced, I can see the damage that the Ottoman cannons have inflicted. The great Canon of Urban, a Hungarian engineer who entered Ottoman service when Constantine could not afford to pay him, has created several significant breaches. The stones that once fit together so perfectly that mortar was hardly needed are now scattered and broken. Still, the wall is far from defenseless, and Giustiniani has positioned his men to make the most of its remaining strengths. With Giustiniani tonight is a small group of Catalan soldiers, led by a captain named Per Giulia. These men have also chosen to remain in Constantinople, despite having no material stake in the city's fate. Giulia is a thoughtful man who has spent years fighting in various Mediterranean conflicts, and he has developed a philosophy about warfare that goes beyond simple profit or patriotism. Captain Giustiniani, Giulia says quietly as they examine a section of damaged wall, "My men have been asking me why we are here. They know we could leave tomorrow with honor. No one expects foreigners to die for a lost cause. What should I tell them?" Giustiniani pauses in his examination of the fortifications and looks out over the sleeping city. "Tell them that some things are worth defending even when you cannot win. This city, this empire, they have preserved something precious for over 1,000 years. They kept alive the learning of the ancient world when barbarians were burning libraries. They maintained the traditions of Roman law when the West had forgotten what justice meant. They created beauty in art, in architecture, in literature that has enriched all of humanity, that deserves to be defended, regardless of the outcome." Giulia nods slowly. "And if we fall tomorrow, then we will have borne witness to the end of something great, and we will have shown that there are still men willing to fight for ideals rather than profit. That too has value." The 2 men continue their inspection in comfortable silence, each lost in his own thoughts about duty, honor, and the strange circumstances that have brought them to this ancient city on the edge of destruction. In the Imperial Library, a different kind of battle is being fought against time and circumstance. Master John Cantacuzzinos and his assistants have been working for weeks to save as many manuscripts as possible from what might be the destruction of one of the world's greatest collections of books and documents. The Byzantine Imperial Library contains treasures that exist nowhere else on Earth. Here are works by ancient philosophers whose thoughts have been preserved only through the careful copying of Byzantine scribes. Here are histories that record events long forgotten elsewhere, scientific treatises that preserve knowledge from the classical world, religious commentaries that represent centuries of theological development, and literary works that capture the essence of Byzantine civilization. Master Cantacuzzinos has spent his entire adult life among these books, and he knows each volume as a parent knows a child. The manuscript of Plato's Republic, copied by an 11th century monk whose beautiful handwriting still glows on the parchment. The only surviving copy of Sappho's complete poems, rescued from Alexandria before that great library was destroyed. Mathematical works by Archimedes that preserve geometric proofs found nowhere else. The secret history of Procopius, with its scandalous but invaluable account of Justinian's court. Tonight, faced with the impossible task of choosing which books to try to save, Cantacuzzinos must make decisions that break his heart. He and his assistants wrap the most precious volumes in oiled cloth and seal them in wooden boxes. Some will be hidden in secret chambers within the palace walls. Others will be entrusted to individuals who plan to leave the city, and a few will be given to Western merchants who have promised to carry them to safety in Italy or France. Master, says his young assistant Stephanos, who has worked in the library for 5 years and loves these books almost as much as his mentor. There are still so many. How can we possibly choose? Cantacuzzinos pauses in his work and looks around the library that has been his life's work. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, loaded with scrolls and codices that represent the intellectual heritage of a civilization. We save what we can, Stephanos. But remember, the real treasure isn't in these physical books themselves. It's in the ideas they contain, the knowledge they preserve, the inspiration they provide. Those things cannot be destroyed by fire or sword. He picks up a manuscript of Homer's Iliad, illustrated with beautiful miniatures that show scenes from the Trojan War. This book has taught hundreds of people about courage and loyalty and the tragic cost of war. Even if this particular copy is lost, those lessons live on in the minds of people who learned from them. And perhaps someday, in some library we cannot imagine, scholars will create new copies based on the memories and notes of those who knew these works. As the night wears on, they continue their work in reverent silence. Each book they handle receives a moment of recognition, a silent farewell, before being carefully wrapped and placed in its container. Some volumes are selected for their unique content, others for their historical importance, still others simply because Cantacuzzinos cannot bear to leave them behind. The work is interrupted periodically by visitors, soldiers asking for maps of the city, courtiers seeking historical precedents for their current situation, even Emperor Constantine himself, who comes to bid farewell to the library that has been one of his greatest sources of comfort and wisdom. Master John, the Emperor says quietly, I want you to know that preserving these books is as important as defending the walls. You are saving the soul of our civilization. Your Majesty, Cantacuzzinos replies, these books will survive because the ideas in them are stronger than any army. They have already survived 1,000 years of wars and disasters. They will survive whatever comes tomorrow. Throughout the city, ordinary families are spending what might be their last night as citizens of the Byzantine Empire in ways both mundane and profound. In thousands of homes, people are engaged in the simple activities that make up human life: cooking, cleaning, caring for children, tending the sick, sharing stories, offering comfort to neighbors and friends. Near the harbor district, where the smell of the sea mingles with the smoke of cooking fires, Maria the baker is preparing bread for the morning, even though she isn't certain there will be customers to buy it. Her movements are automatic, learned through 20 years of early morning work in her family's shop. The familiar actions of measuring flour, kneading dough, and tending the oven provide comfort in an uncertain time. Maria's shop is small but well known in the neighborhood. For 2 decades, She has provided daily bread for families who have watched their children grow up eating her loaves. She knows the preferences of each customer, who likes their bread soft, who prefers it crusty, which families need smaller loaves because money is tight. Tonight, as she shapes tomorrow's bread, she finds herself thinking about each of these families, wondering what will become of them, whether they will be safe, whether the simple rhythm of daily bread will continue under new rulers. Her neighbor, Anna the Weaver, is working at her loom in the small hours of the night, creating a piece of cloth that might never be finished. The repetitive motion of the shuttle, the gradual emergence of pattern from individual threads, feels like a prayer or a meditation. The cloth she is creating shows a traditional Byzantine design, stylized eagles and crosses interwoven with geometric patterns that have decorated textiles for centuries. Anna learned her craft from her mother, who learned it from her mother before her. The techniques she uses, the patterns she creates, the dyes she mixes are all part of a tradition that stretches back generations. As she works, she finds herself thinking not about tomorrow's uncertainties, but about the countless women who have sat at looms like this one, creating beauty and utility from simple thread, contributing their small part to the great tapestry of human civilization. In a house near the Golden Horn, 3 generations of the Comnenos family, no relation to the imperial dynasty but proud of sharing the name, are gathered around their hearth. Grandfather Nikephoros, who is 78 and has lived through multiple sieges and political upheavals, sits with his son Michael and his grandson John, sharing stories and wisdom that he hopes will help them navigate whatever comes next. I have seen Constantinople change many times, the old man says, his voice still strong despite his age. I was here when the Latins ruled the city, and I saw the joy when our emperors returned. I lived through the plague that killed half the population, and I watched the city rebuild. I have seen good emperors and bad ones, years of plenty and years of famine. Through it all, the city endures because its people endure. Young John, who is 25 and has a family of his own, listens carefully to his grandfather's words. He has heard these stories before, but tonight they carry special weight. Grandfather, what should we do if the city falls? Whatever you must to protect your family and preserve your faith, the old man replies. Empires rise and fall, but families continue. Honor continues. The things that make us human, love, courage, wisdom, compassion, these things survive any conquest. Michael, who is 50 and has spent his life as a craftsman making religious icons, adds his own thoughts. Remember also that we are not just Byzantine but Christian. Our faith has sustained us through every trial, and it will sustain us through this one. Whatever happens to our earthly city, we are citizens of a heavenly one that no army can conquer. As the night deepens toward dawn, Emperor Constantine convenes one last formal council meeting in the palace's Great Hall. The room that once hosted elaborate ceremonial gatherings now holds a small group of exhausted men who bear the responsibility for the city's defense and the empire's honor in its final hours. The meeting takes place in the Hall of the Golden Cupola, a chamber decorated with mosaics depicting the great victories of Byzantine history. The walls show scenes of Justinian's conquests, Basil II's triumph over the Bulgarians, the recovery of Constantinople from the Latins. Tonight, these images of past glory provide both inspiration and painful contrast to present circumstances. Present at this final council are the key military commanders and civilian officials who have chosen to remain in the city. Giovanni Giustiniani represents the foreign defenders and speaks for the professional soldiers who have come to Constantinople's aid. Cardinal Isidore of Kiev, who had fled to Italy after the Council of Florence but returned to share Constantinople's fate, represents both the Catholic forces and the complicated religious politics that have plagued the empire's final years. Lucas Notaras, the Grand Duke who commands what remains of the Byzantine fleet, sits across from George Francis, the emperor's closest friend and most trusted advisor. These two men have sometimes disagreed on policy. Notaras opposed the union with Rome, whilst Francis supported it. But tonight such differences seem insignificant compared to their shared commitment to the empire they have served their entire lives. Also present are several other nobles and military officers. Constantine XI, a member of one of Byzantium's greatest families, Theodore Karastinos, who commands the palace guard, and Orhan Çelebi, an Ottoman prince who has found refuge in Constantinople and now fights against his own people out of gratitude and conviction. The meeting is brief and focused, as everyone understands the situation with painful clarity. The Ottoman forces vastly outnumber the defenders. The city's walls, though still formidable, have been severely damaged by artillery bombardment. Supplies are running low, and no relief force is coming from west, despite years of appeals to European rulers. "Gentlemen," Constantine says, his voice calm and steady despite the weight of the moment, "tomorrow we face the greatest challenge in our empire's long history. I want each of you to know that you are free to leave the city if you choose. No man should be bound to die for a cause that is not his own choosing." Justiniani speaks first, his words carrying the authority of a professional soldier who has seen many battles. "Your Majesty, I came to Constantinople to defend this city and its people, and that is what I shall do. My men and I will hold our section of the wall as long as there is strength in our bodies and breath in our lungs." Cardinal Isidore nods gravely. "The Church stands with the Empire, Your Majesty. We fight tomorrow not just for Constantinople, but for all of Christianity. If this city falls, the road to Rome lies open." One by one, the other commanders pledge their commitment. Lucas Notaras, despite his past disagreements with imperial policy, speaks with particular emotion. "Your Majesty, we have had our differences over the years, but tonight we are united in purpose. The fleet will fight until the last ship is sunk and the last sailor has given his life." Theodore Karastinos, who commands the Imperial Guard, stands to make his declaration.